Hello again. We're back with the HBO BBC part-funded drama series Rome, and we've moved on to episode 4, Stealing from Saturn. So this is something of a bridging episode, sort of setting up plot lines for the future, and relatively little happens in it. So I think hopefully I can make this a shorter video than usual, and even than last time, and get well within, far less than the duration of the episode. It's just over 50 minutes. Oh, and by the way, for those who are starting to note these things in the comments, I've changed some of the DVDs and Blu-rays from the shelf behind me because I own far more DVDs and Blu-rays than probably is healthy. But while I like streaming services, I quite like to have the physical things. So, and I do enjoy watching movies and good TV dramas and comedies and the like. It's my way of relaxing when I get the time. It's just to switch off completely and just watch something for a bit. So there's a lot out there, though, obviously with particular focus, depending on my interest. But anyway, I'll keep changing them over the talks to come so that we can rotate things through. But I've only altered a few, but there's some up there just in case that for those who get fed up looking at me and are trying to work out just what's behind because it's more interesting. Anyway, episode 4. There's aspects of this where, as I say, it's really setting up lots of plot lines. So you have stuff with Caesar and Servilia and Attia. You have quite a lot with Varenus, his wife, the wife's lover, brother-in-law, all this sort of thing, and also bringing in the local gangster. That will be a major theme in the thing. So it's sort of slightly, it's slower paced. There are there's less going on, less activity, and even the sort of the one big fight scene you have with Pullo and Varenus is cut quite quickly. So you see them roughing up a few of Pompey's men, but then it's just over. And also one of the things that does detract a little bit from the series, Pullo and Varenus are mostly apart for this episode, and Pullo doesn't come in very much at all. Anyway, the context is for the story. Obviously, at the end of the other one, we'd had Pullo going off with the treasury money that Pompey had tried to sneak out of Rome, that the men involved had stolen, and then they run into Pullo and Varenus, who kill or drive them off. So it starts with the brutal interrogation of a soldier who's sort of hung up by his heels and being stabbed, being cut about to find out this is the survivor of the escort for the money as to where it's gone. We introduce Quintus Pompey. Now, I think this is played by an actor called Rick Warden. I'm well disposed towards him as I am to anybody who was in Band of Brothers. I think that was just such a great series, and he was Lieutenant Welsh in that, so good Welsh local name as well. So that can't do any harm for me. So I like the actor. The character is entirely fictional, and I found him a bit annoying. It's presumably he's invented to have a villainous sidekick for Pompey to do sort of Pompey's dirty work and all this sort of thing. But his scenes always feel rather contrived. And, Pompey did have 2 sons, both of whom would accompany him to war, accompany he and his wife, though they were only really old enough to fight in the later stages. Gnaeus Pompey leads one of the leaders of the army in the Munda campaign in 45 BC. Sextus Pompey is a big figure in the 30s BC for his bases in Sicily and becomes a major naval commander. And there's a sort of slight hint where I think Quintus is called commander of the fleet or something in the Tyrrhenian Sea or something like that. But it is a little odd where you invent a character like that's associated with a major figure. So again, as the historian, don't particularly like that. Like the actor, he does the part well, but it's a little bit over the top in his sort of behaviour and the idea they've been. I'm not sure that level of torture so quickly, but okay, you can argue either way with that. One minor thing, I mean, Pullo and Varenus talk about this with each other a couple of times, and Antony, when he sees Varenus later on, talks about, as a deserter, as you could be crucified. You're not, you're a Roman citizen, you don't get crucified. You get flogged and beheaded, which isn't much fun either, but you don't get crucified. Crucifying a Roman citizen is something that only really bad governors and corrupt governors and crazy emperors do. But it's a theme. It comes in, it pervades. It's the same, as in the movie Gladiator. Maximus's wife and child being crucified and burned. You don't do that to a senator's family, however mad and bad you are as emperor. So they discover that the money's gone missing. They think that Caesar's got it, or at least that Pulla and Varenus have got it. So the Quintus is sent off to find them. And you see a little bit. You get a little bit of a hint. They sort of tell the story. They tell a story about the Italian campaign. But again, because they don't have budget and inclination for armies on the march, lots of manoeuvre, all this sort of thing, you actually don't really get it. And a false impression is created in this episode and the next episode that Caesar's hanging around in Rome. This is all quite slow paced. In fact, his march down south into Italy is very quick. It wins through speed to a great extent. There are attempts to negotiate, as you'll get in this episode, and there are lots of bloodless encounters where the Pompeians surrender or run away before Caesar gets there. There is a little bit of fighting, but it's very one-sided. Corfinium, you have the big thing where the Pompeians do hold out with, Domitius Ahenobarbus, who won't listen to Pompey and is, ancestor of the Emperor Nero, and you can see where he gets it from, who just keeps fighting, but fights, surrenders, is pardoned, goes back, fights Caesar again, goes off to Massilia next time. There's a lot more going on that the series is not inclined to do or is unable to do, and it does create a false impression. Now, I suppose you could justify it by saying, well, they do, in these few episodes, a lot of the sort of political aspect of the Civil War for the first year or two, in terms of Caesar trying to do a deal, Caesar trying to win over people in Rome, and all this sort of thing. These sort of things happen, just not at this point. Not really in the way that they're depicted. But I can understand, in terms of simplifying the story, I would only say, and this perhaps is me as just wanting my action and my car chases and explosions, or the equivalent, these next couple of episodes always struck me as a bit slow and held the series up a bit after things had got going. But again, that's personal taste. And as I say, I think I can see what they're trying to do. But it does mean distorting the history quite a bit, and obviously I'm picky when it comes to that sort of thing, but other people don't have to be. So you have Attia is asked to host a big dinner party for senators back in Rome. There are hundreds of senators left in Rome, so we only see a small sample, and mostly it's a theme we'll see throughout this. We tend to see all the senators as old. And bear in mind, you can become quaestor at 30 and you're automatically a senator, and other people are being rolled at that point. There are one or two sort of younger men, and you notice in these scenes but generally speaking, everybody who's a senator is rather old. And it's sort of a cliched thing. It's a little bit like British colonels and generals in the First World War on screen are nearly always depicted as geriatric, when, many of them were sort of mid to late 30s and 40s and this sort of thing. They weren't that old. But as is always the tendency in that most cinematic things, particularly in military and action contests, the actors playing the parts are much older than the people they actually played, because they're famous actors. That's how it's taken time for them to get known, and sometimes it can look wrong if everyone is as young on screen as they were in reality, doing a lot of these things. It's a minor thing. So Attia has this big get together for on Caesar's behalf, and Servilia is invited, and Attia it gives her a chance to show how unpleasant and soap opera she is, by her puzzlement about that. Is Caesar still having an affair with Servilia and all that sort of thing. You don't really get much of that. It's building up to that, which will be a feature of the next episode. You start to see a bit more of Servilia. There's and it ends on quite a tender scene of the two of them together. But Calpurnia appears a little bit. Again, the way they've written the character, very well done. We know next to nothing about her. She's Caesar's wife. They're married for 16 years, but she doesn't feature very much. And of course, you have these stories. You get it in Shakespeare, the idea that Calpurnia is barren because they haven't had a child. Well, they marry, and within a few months, Julius Caesar goes off to Gaul and doesn't return for 10 years, and then spends the next couple of years fighting the Civil War. So Calpurnian women don't travel out to the provinces in those days. It's not normal. It just doesn't happen. So, other than in the exceptional circumstances of civil war. So, how are they going to have children when they're not physically in the same place? It seems to escape people when they're looking at this. So, it was a political marriage, as were the marriages of Roman senators in general. No sign of any particular emotional bond, but perhaps I think the problem is Calpurnia as a character has to be limited here. She's got to be included, but she's not going to be a major player because they've already gone with other characters for that. So she doesn't really get to do a lot. You have the dinner, you have all the preparations, all the stuff about food and all this sort of thing. You've got Attia choosing her wig. So they have a bit of a wig thing in this series. I'm not, whilst you see on the sculptures, statues, busts, that sort of thing, the very ornate hairstyles that Roman aristocratic women started to adopt, and would more so in the imperial period. And you could argue that many of these might well be hair extensions, wigs, all that sort of thing. I'm not sure, and for all the weird colours. I mean, it gave it a sort of slightly 18th century feel. I don't think you could probably argue it, but I don't think there's that convincing a case for this being normal. But anyway, that was again, it was to make things exotic, a bit different, give it a Rome that you haven't seen before. And it's, as I say, it's a viable interpretation, but I'm not sure it's one that I buy. You have Caesar with Servilia and talking about Brutus and saying how, please pass on my best wishes. He may have joined my enemies, but he's still Brutus, and I care about him, and all this sort of thing, and emphasizing the clemency. Now that's rather good. Caesar has emphasized this all the way through. That he's not Sulla, that he's not massacring everybody, that he's come into Rome and he's not killing people. Yes, you keep seeing the same little group of legionaries marching up and down in the Forum and elsewhere to keep order. This is all exaggerated. Caesar doesn't stop in Rome for any length of time until after all this campaign, until after Pompey's fled. So it's all rather contrived, and as I say, it's anticipating the sort of thing he's going to have to do in the future, but it doesn't happen at this point. And it does give a sense of the campaign slowing down, which was very definitely not true in 49. He does keep going. So you have the politicking, you have the, while this is going on, Vorenus and his wife and family are having a feast and welcoming guests. He wants to start an import business and all this sort of thing as a trader, and this may mean the gangster, where you have a flare-up with the family and all this sort of thing. And at the end of all this, Quintus appears with his sort of head torturer and a group of Scythians. I think they're called Scythians, and they have these curved swords, rather like Tulwas or everything, where the edge is on the outside of the curve rather than the inside. I can't think of any evidence for those in the ancient world, certainly not in this period. So it's something, when you get exotic troops, that's what they tend to end up being given on screen, and often sometimes even in fiction as well. But it's not the case. If you had anything like the Greek coppice and the machaira and things like that, where you have curved, almost like a sort of large kukri, but the edge is on the inside, not the outside, and they've usually got quite a point as well. So Vorenus is in trouble. They've grabbed his wife. They're interrogating him about the money, and then it sort of lifts. I know I keep going on about Pullo and Vorenus, but they are one of the strengths of the series. And Pullo turns up being carried in a litter with a load of people around him, with the slave girl next to him, sort of basically throwing money around as not exactly keeping the secret that he's discovered all this gold. But he comes in, helps them fight off the bad guys, the Pompeians. They capture Quintus Pompey, and then Vorenus, you've brought this on me. Why did you steal this? Starts addressing him as legionary Pullo, all this sort of thing. But again, they play it very well, and he gets Pullo to take Quintus Pompey to Caesar, admit what he's done, where the money is. So Caesar gets this really good news in the middle of his feast. He's called away, and here's the news that you've got Pompey's son as a captive, but also this is where all the money's gone, all the money he so desperately needs, because he's been, up until this point, spending money to get the augurs to see favourable auspices for him, to reward everybody he sees as a friend by support, basically, to convince Romans that it's worth not opposing him and, if possible, supporting him. And suddenly this windfall, it's all very contrived, and not, you know, in real life he was going and took money from the treasury and all this sort of thing, which I think is where they've come up more directly. And money was obviously a big problem because Caesar is very, very lavish. He keeps spending a lot to buy support in this way. So there's aspects where they've taken the history, but they've sort of gone a slightly different way with it, dramatic license and all that sort of thing. And, you know, Varenus is sort of part. It's the mock telling off. Caesar looks up and sort of says thank you to the heavens for this windfall, and then ticks Pullo off and says, "Well, I'm not going to punish you for this this crime of stealing this money, but you can have 100 gold coins," and then sends off Pullo and Antony to go and dig the money up. So you get things are picking up again at this point, but there's a sense of more going on. The whole thing has been a bit contrived that Pompey lost this money, therefore he can't fight. Caesar's got this money, therefore he can. It's a sort of, again, it comes back to the sort of MacGuffin principle of this is all a simple way of explaining something complicated and then moving on. In the aftermath of this, Caesar on his way back begins to have an epileptic fit. Octavian is there along with Posca. Posca gets Octavian to help, and they get Caesar away into a sort of cupboard area where he's hidden. But one of the slaves, the sort of one ahead of the kitchen, hears the moan Caesar makes and mistakes them for passion, and is assuming that he's, you know, having an affair with Octavian, which will again lead on to a plot line with Attia later on. Caesar's epilepsy is obviously well recorded, but not described in any detail. We don't know how frequent the attacks were, whether it was getting worse in later life. There's a big question mark that we'll come to when we get to that stage of how healthy he was in the last months of his life, whether, you know, some people saying later on, like Cicero and others, he probably wouldn't have come back from his Eastern campaign, you know, he just wasn't. But was that wishful thinking? Was that a realistic estimate of Caesar's health at the time? So you have this scene that shows that, I can't remember, I think it's probably the only epileptic episode he has during the series, but as I say, it's been years since I've watched all this, so I'm enjoying coming back to each episode one at a time, and I do these videos after each one, so I haven't got as far as that yet. He sent Quintus Pompeius, this fictional character, fictional son of Pompey, back to the Pompeians with a message offering terms for negotiation. And again, it gives them a chance before they've had the fit episode. Octavian's looking puzzled as to why he's doing this, and then Caesar sort of helps him, but he quickly works it out. It's establishing Octavian as someone with an incredibly sharp, cynical, devious political mind, even though he's only a kid. And it's a nice touch. You know, he's got his bulla, his charm on a cord around his neck, which he wore until he formally became a man at Rome. You know, his age is always a little bit vague because they've sent him off to Gaul back in 52 BC, and now we're in 49, and he's still, obviously the actor looks the same because that's what he is, and he will look the same throughout this series and the first couple of episodes of the next, before they change the casting, so he can grow up very, very abruptly. So he works it out, you're giving Pompey terms that he can't accept, but that the senators with him will think that he can, and was sowing discord basically in the other camp. And that's how it plays out. You have the debate with Quintus, who's just violent and wants to kill everybody, you know, complaining, while Cicero in particular, Metellus, and Brutus all think, well, actually Caesar's being reasonable, he's not asking for very much. You know, he just wants to be immune from prosecution, he wants to keep his army so he's secure and all this sort of thing, or we both disband and all. I think, yes, actually it's both disband this time, isn't it? And Pompey gets annoyed. Pompey is the man holding out to keep fighting the civil war, though Cato is clearly also convinced that you can't deal with Caesar, whereas the others are more flaky. Cicero, of course, at this stage in reality had not yet committed at all, and met Caesar a couple of times. Caesar comes to stay with him before he finally decides later in the year, after Pompey has gone to Macedonia and Greece, that he will join him there. So again, mentioned before, not the way things worked in reality, but I can understand with their, you know, they want to keep a limited cast of characters so everybody knows who everyone is, and yet still deal with some of these issues. Caesar certainly did try to negotiate, and, you know, he's sending back these people he's taken prisoner and allows them to go back. There's the idea that open communications. He asks to meet Pompey in person. Pompey is not allowed to do that. One suspects actually that the main opposition is not so much coming from Pompey, who wants to keep fighting the war, as from the senators, like Scipio, like Cato, who are determined that they will destroy Caesar's career and see him now, regardless of his behaved. It's almost an insult to them that Caesar isn't Sulla, that he's actually being nice, that he's actually pardoning them. And some people believe that this was just a ploy, just a facade. Even one of Caesar's men, the former tribune Curio, who was married to Fulvia, subsequently married Mark Antony. And again, it's a great shame she didn't get space in the series. Cicero talks about having had a conversation with him, and Curio saying that actually he thought this was all a sham on Caesar's part, that once he's won, we'll see his true nature and he'll start killing people. Now, Curio doesn't live to see Caesar when he's killed in North Africa. Was that right? Was that Curio thinking, well, that's what I do? In fact, Caesar doesn't ever turn very, very violent. I mean, there is a mood in the Civil War that it gets nastier as the campaigns go on. And the 45 BC campaign in Spain, the Battle of Munda, seems particularly vicious when we don't have Caesar's account of this. He never wrote it. It's written by one of his subordinate officers. Talks about heads of Pompeian legionaries being nailed up on the rampart to this sort of thing. Talks about it all as a much more desperate, much more brutal thing. I'm always minded. There's an interesting quote from the 30 Years' War that I remember in a lecture by Ronald Hutton hearing years and years ago, and it's just stuck in my mind, and I don't know the source. That's probably one of his Royalist War Effort or one of his other books. And it talks about how the sort of brutalizing effect of civil wars in particular. He says, in the first year we fought like angels, in the second like men, and in the third like devils. And a lot of wars tend to get nastier, at least in certain aspects and in the sort of more irregular elements of them as they go on. This civil war does to some extent, but Caesar still did not massacre large numbers of his opponents, particularly if unless they'd already surrendered and been sent back and choose to fight him again. He gets eventually fed up of capturing people repeatedly and kills them. But he very definitely is not a Sulla, or even a Pompey, a young butcher like that. Or an Octavian or an Antony, as they will prove. And they might say, well, Caesar was nice and look what good it did him. But nevertheless, it's so... There are attempts to negotiate, which they reflect. They don't quite do it in the way that it really happened, but nevertheless, it's not unreasonable. Just as I say, I have a feeling you end up, Pulla and Vorenus are reunited. That's always good. At the end of it, and you have the setup. Caesar goes to see Servilia at night, and as I say, it's quite a sort of moving scene of these middle-aged lovers, in a sense, that you don't get so often, and Caesar in particular is not depicted as the nicest of men. He is, Kieran Hines plays him as very, very ambitious and determined, but on the other hand, and his kindness is more pragmatic rather than from inside. Although you could argue, if you read the war commentaries, Caesar does have, as did other Romans, a sort of almost amoral attitude towards violence and atrocity. If being nice will get you what you want, then you're nice. If being vicious will get you what you want, then you're vicious. So there is an element of that's a reasonable reflection. As I say, I think when I first watched it, I felt he was rather too cold in the part. And certainly, even now, I'm not sure he's got the Caesar charm that could win over a whole room so quickly. But it's his interpretation is growing on me, and obviously it's the way they're written. And one thing, it's been raised in some of the comments, sometimes when I look at how they treat Pompey, how they treat the politics of all this sort of time, you can see the shadow really of the decision made partway through the series that it was going to be much shorter than they'd originally planned. Had it been the 3 seasons or more, then you would have looked at this not as one series that's basically about Caesar and one series that's basically about Antony and Octavian, and instead it would have been much more about the rise of Octavian, which was their original plan. And the bits with Caesar and Pompey, you'd say, okay, yeah, I can see why that's simplified and distorted a bit, because it's just preparation. It makes it seem more important and jump out more to me. But again, I'm a historian, this is what I do, so things that bother me needn't bother anybody else, nor should they bother anybody else necessarily. So you've got things set up. Caesar's reunited with Servilia. You know, they seem happy, and Caesar's got his money. Pompey's got no money. There isn't a lot more really within the episode. It's putting things in place. It's bringing them together, preparing for things that are going to happen in the next couple. As I said, the pace of the Italian campaign, the nature is wrong. This makes it all much slower than it really was, but I can see why they do it. And it's all about really our characters interacting. There are elements where I don't particularly like the Varenus and family subplot, and then the Varenus and gangster subplot that will go on and expand. Because I'm more interested in the politics and what's going on. You have the bit where Antony summons Varenus and offers to basically, make him a prefect and recall him to the colours and all those things. We need good men like you and all this sort of thing, and he refuses. There's, gratuitous nudity then for for the sake of it, so I've got to be very careful with the caps I use because we don't want to see that sort of thing on a family channel. So again, it's hinting towards, because eventually, of course, he'll be forced to go back and he'll fight for them again because of what's going to happen in the future. As I say, it's lots of setting up. There's, again, that good look, Rome, it's mostly focused in Rome, and the Rome sets are very good, whether it's in an aristocratic house, whether it's in the sort of back streets of Varenus and his family and all this sort of thing, whether it's in the Forum. It's all quite nicely done. But as I say, it's sort of bridging episode. So there's less to say, so I think we'll leave it at that for today. And next time we'll have more to talk about. There's obviously much more involving Servilia and Attia, but also as things develop. So that's it for today, episode 4, and thanks for watching.